In this week's training focus, I want to talk about evidence. Now, in our profession, we as death investigators, the most important piece of evidence in any death scene is the body. Others might argue it's the gun that made the bullet hole, or it's the knife that did the stabbing, or it's the drugs that caused the overdose, or it's the car that hit the pedestrian. But none of that is correct. Without the body, all that other things are peripheral things in the scene or around, but may or may not have anything to do with the death. So the most important piece of evidence is the body. Now that means we need to treat that body as we would other evidence. We need to make sure that the body bag, if we're going to toxicology and autopsy and things like that, if there's going to be further examination, we need to make sure that body bag is locked when it leaves our presence. And that way can be documented that the lock was intact and unlocked at the time the body received further documentation and exploration. Now, what is evidence? Now, there's evidence and there's personal property. And evidence, there are really two definitions of evidence. One, evidence is any material or item that can contribute to the cause and manner of death, and it's considered important in supporting the facts of your case when you rule a cause and manner. Now, the other thing that evidence is the items and the material that goes to prove the elements of a crime, if in fact there really actually was a crime. So let's say, for instance, that there is a rope around somebody's neck, a ligature around their neck. Now, that can be evidence for us to determine that this was a ligature strangulation. And through our investigation, we may rule that a suicide. The person attached a ligature. They did it for the purpose of dying by suicide, and our evidence and our investigation proves that. But we can have the exact same case, and that rope now becomes evidence to prove the elements of a crime, i.e. murder. So Jim Bob placed the rope around John's neck and strangled him with it. And then he may have tied it up to something. We have the same body and the same rope. The rope proved the cause of death was ligature strangulation, but through further investigation, it's determined that it was a homicide, not a suicide, and now the rope becomes a very important piece of that evidence to prove the element of the crime. Now, there's a lot more examples that can be given, but that's what the two things evidence does. Then there's personal property. Personal property is anything that belongs to the body or the decedent that can be given back to next of kin. A watch, necklace, clothing, a wallet, all of that might be considered personal property. A set of car keys, set of keys. However, if a wallet has $3 in it, it may be considered personal property and returned to the family. If that wallet has $30,000 in it, then we obviously are going to take a closer look at that wallet with the cash to try to determine if this cash legally belongs to the decedent. Could this cash have been some way caused an altercation or something that would contributed to why this person died? And then that might be evidence. So it can cross a line there a little bit depending on what the item is and in what context you're looking at it. When it comes to evidence classifications, there are 4 classifications. There's physical evidence versus non-physical evidence. There's real evidence versus demonstrative evidence. Known versus unknown. Individual versus class. Now, known versus unknown is that we know what this item, this object, this material is. Unknown is that we do not know. Maybe it's a clear liquid and we have to send to the state lab to determine what this clear liquid is. It might be water, it might be kerosene. Individual versus class is we have a fiber that is a hair that has a root that has DNA that comes back to this dog. And this specific dog in this specific house is where that hair came from. Then you may have class. And class may be that you have a hair, you don't have any opportunities to collect DNA from it, but you do know that it is a dog hair. And it might even be narrowed down to a type of dog or a breed of dog. Well, that's going to be a class. Now, we know that we're looking for a German Shepherd, but we don't know what German Shepherd. So that's a class. That can also be in any material, carpet fibers, but it could also be in liquids and solids and any number of things. But we have an individual and class. Of course, real, demonstrative, that's self-explanatory, physical versus non-physical. So those are the four types of evidence classification. Something else that sometimes confuses people is the difference between testimonial evidence and physical evidence. Well, physical evidence is anything that is a physical object. A gun, a knife, blood, spatter on a wall, something that is a physical object or has physical properties is physical evidence. Testimonial evidence are witness statements, victim statements, and also statements on visual observations. For instance, blood spatter on the wall. The blood, the spatter pattern, all of that is physical evidence. Now, you have an expert come in who can look at that spatter pattern and can make some measurements and determinations. Then they can testify as to what that physical evidence on the wall, what does it interpret to? You have a body that it is a piece of evidence. It is a physical evidence. And then you have an autopsy, though you have physical components of that body, that gross anatomy. But then you have the doctor who can then testify as to why this injury caused the death as opposed to another injury. Still the physical evidence, and now testimonial is how it is interpreted, and someone is giving that testimony or those observations. So what role does physical evidence play in a criminal case, for sure, a death case, but a criminal case? One is information on corpus delicti, proof a crime was even committed. You may have a death, but unless you have evidence to indicate or prove that this person died as a result of criminal activity, then you can't rule it a crime. So evidence can prove that a crime was committed, corpus delicti. Then there's information on modus operandi, which is the MO. You always hear about somebody's MO. Well, it's a characteristic or a way of committing a crime. And some people have the same MO. They do a crime in a similar way. They have an MO. So evidence can point us to a matching MO or modus operandi. Physical evidence can also link a person to a crime or crime scene. Things like fingerprints, DNA, trace evidence, footwear impressions. That can be evidence that can be attributed to a person and place them at the scene. Doesn't say they're guilty, doesn't say they did anything wrong, but it links them to the crime. It links them to the scene. Evidence can also link a suspect to a victim. Trace evidence, blood patterns, fingerprints, DNA, all of those things now can link to a victim. So I have evidence that can put you in the house. I can put you in this house. I can't say you did anything wrong. You may have the perfect right to be in that house from time to time, but I can place you there. Some of that same evidence, or maybe other, can link you to the victim. Maybe we have a victim, we find DNA, we have no idea you know them, but your DNA is on file, on record, and we find DNA on the victim that matches you, I can now place you in the crime scene, and I can place you linking you to the victim. Doesn't mean you killed anybody. It just means, obviously, you are linked in some way to that victim. Physical evidence can do that. Physical evidence can prove or disprove witness testimony. Some witnesses lie. And physical evidence can either support their statement or might cause their statement to be shown as less effective or incorrect. So physical evidence can prove or disprove a witness statement, and it helps determine if it's consistent with the death or the crime. And then, of course, evidence can give you proof positive of who the suspect is. Several ways to do that. DNA or evidence, fingerprints, or different evidence in and around the body, or physical evidence such as the gun with the shell casings and the bullets that match the gun, or you're in possession of a knife with the victim's blood. That physical evidence then can go towards that criminal case. Sometimes physical evidence is just used to provide investigative leads. Analyzing the evidence can be, at least partially, proof that someone was involved in the crime. For instance, as I kind of said earlier, I can link you to a location. I might find your fingerprints at a scene. Well, that gives me a lead. I can now track you down. I can find out who you are, why you were there, and it may be that you were there perfectly good reasons, and you were even there 3 days before the incident occurred, but it at least gives me leads. It gives me someplace to go. I might find a fiber on a victim, that fiber is a class, which means it matches carpet in a vehicle of a certain make, a certain model, certain color. And of course, there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of those cars with that carpet. But now I know that fiber on that victim got transferred to them from this car. Now, do I have a suspect that has that car? Does that victim have contact or has some type of connection to that car? But that gives me an investigative lead. The victim somehow has gotten a carpet fiber on them that matches this make and model of car who uses that carpet. That's an investigative lead. And the last thing evidence does, it does a great demonstration in court. Juries like to see a show and tell. They like to see the gun. They like to see the knife. They like to see the DNA results. They like to see the physical evidence. And of course, you can talk about it all day long, but when you have the evidence in court, it helps the jury to understand what happened. So the last thing evidence does is it's used for demonstration in court purposes. Now, the key factors in evidence, when you collect evidence, and we're not going to have time to talk about all the ways to collect evidence and all the ways to package it, but there are 3 things that's extremely important. Number 1, chain of custody. You can't collect something and then use it for court purposes if you have not been able to maintain chain of custody. And that means you collected it and people have signed for it and have verified that it has been properly locked up and cared for the entire time throughout the prosecution. If you collect something and you throw it in your trunk and 6 months later you find it and take it out, then that chain of custody obviously has been broken. So you have to maintain chain of custody. Number 2, proper packaging. Again, we can't go into it very deeply, but you can't package a piece of evidence in an improper package. Don't put wet items in plastic bags. They will corrode and mildew and decompose, and you will not be able to use them. Don't put dirt in paper bags. The paper bag will break, the dirt will fall out. Don't put needles in paper or plastic bags. So there are certain containers that certain evidence needs to be put into, and you should take the time to learn what that is. Lastly, proper documentation in your report. So the 3 main factors of evidence collection is chain of custody, proper packaging, and proper documentation in your report. That includes photographs, and you need to describe in your narrative what you found and where you found it, how you collected it, and possibly even how it's connected to the crime. Those are big factors when it comes to evidence. Every item and material evidence collected has to be identified correctly, has to be collected correctly, and stored correctly. If not, you will lose the credibility of that evidence, and you might lose the evidence altogether. Different evidence has different containers and different things that it needs to be saved in and collected and stored in. You collect it in one container that may not be the container you want to use to store it long term. And remember the low card exchange principle. This says that every contact leaves a trace, and of course this includes you. When you're in a scene, you can add to and take away evidence simply by being there. If you're not careful, you can, on your shoes or on your hands, on your clothing, you can bring evidence in. You can bring that dog hair in on your pants. You can bring in a seed or a piece of vegetation that's caught on your shirt or something. So you can introduce evidence, but also by interacting in the scene, you can have evidence get stuck to you and transfer it out. And this has to do with your person, your equipment. Everything within that scene adds to and takes away, or has certainly the possibility of adding to and taking away evidence. So be sure you understand this. Be sure you understand the type of scene you're in and what type of personal protective equipment that you need to wear. Do you have to be head to toe in a full Tyvek suit with mask and boot covers and everything? Or do you just need a hairnet, gloves, and a mask? But what do you need to make sure that you're not adding to or taking away evidence from that scene? So remember that evidence, of course, is ultra important. The body is the most important piece of evidence. And all evidence, all physical evidence has a role to play in your case, determining cause and manner and or in convictions. It has to be collected right. It has to be maintained right, and it has to be documented correctly. If you miss any of those three, physical evidence is no good. Remember, evidence can break your case, and evidence can hurt your case. And most of all, you, as the investigator, can totally mess the case if you do not maintain proper control of the evidence that you're in charge of. Hey, if you have not subscribed to the Death Investigator magazine, you need to do that today. This is a free online magazine, comes to your inbox every single month, and it is dedicated to the field of death investigation and all of those supporting roles. Each edition is packed with timely articles, interactive links to videos and audio training, and lots and lots and lots of extra. Articles are written by industry professionals. There's training announcements from various organizations across the country. And best of all, it's focused around our profession and our lives. There's articles in there that not only help you be a better investigator, but there's articles to help you be a better human, to be better in your family, to be better in your finances. This publication is a well-rounded publication that is focused on you. So subscribe today. Go to deathinvestigatormagazine.com and get your first free issue and then one each month thereafter.